Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Baldessari, and I welcome you on behalf of PPIC and our Board of Directors. And we have two members of our Board of Directors here today, Steve Merksimer and Ruben Barales. PPIC is pleased to present this program featuring John Cox. Thank you, John, for being here today. Really appreciate it. This event is part of the PPIC's 2017 Speaker Series on California's Future. We would like to thank the sponsors of this series for their underwriting support. Some of those organizations are here today. All of them are listed on the screen and on the back of your program. Thank you. This series is also funded by the PPIC Donor Circle and the PPIC Corporate Circle, groups of individuals and organizations that provide generous support to PPIC. Funding from our sponsors and donors make programs like today's possible and ensures that they are free and open to the public, both in person and online. As part of our speaker series, PPIC is inviting all of the major candidates for governor to participate in a public event. The purpose is to give Californians a better understanding of how the candidates intend to address the challenges facing our state. Before we begin, PPIC is always trying to improve our events. One of the ways that we do that is through a short survey that we will be sending you later on today. So please take a few moments to let us know how we did. Also, it's a good reminder for me as well, please silence your cell phone. I'm going to do that right now. I would now like to introduce John Cox, and we'll be coming up to the stage together soon. As you know, he's a candidate for governor of California in 2018. As you also know, the June primary is less than 6 months away.
Yep.
June 5th. He's a successful small businessman and lives in San Diego. He's the author of the Neighborhood Legislature Initiative. Among other things, we'll talk about that today. He founded an affiliate of an organization called Rebuilding Together, a nationwide organization that repairs the homes of low-income seniors and disabled persons. So thank you, John, for joining me. And thank you for joining me at this program as well. There'll be a chance for questions and answers after John and I start the conversation. Thank you. Thank you. John? Whoops, okay. It's a pleasure to have you here today, give more people a chance to be familiar with what you stand for in your leadership style and your vision of California. And we exchanged correspondence, had a chance to talk a week ago, and agreed on a first question, which we have asked our other candidates as well. And that is, what do you think are the top 3 issues that will have major consequences for California's future?
Well, thank you, Mark, for allowing me to be here today, and thank all of you for participating today. California stands at a crossroads, I believe, and the election in 2018 is going to be very important. I'm 62 years old. I'm not looking for another step up a rung of a political ladder. I'm running for governor to transform this state. And this state needs it because it's got some serious issues on a lot of things. And we're going to hopefully talk about a lot of those today. The 3 top priorities, I would say, Mark, in answer to your question, would be the corruptive influence of special interest money. That's number 1, because it literally stops in its tracks any meaningful reform of anything. And I'm talking housing, education, water, energy, you name it. The idea that special interests fund the campaigns of people they're looking to get things done, to me, is an indefensible system. It really is, and it's an impediment to reform. And if we're going to really make changes that are going to meaningfully impact life in this state, we're going to have to do something about that. The second follows on that, and that is this state, under the current one-party, basically crony rule, has become unaffordable, especially for the middle class, and it's pushed a lot of the middle class into almost poverty situations. And I'm talking about the cost of housing, I'm talking about the cost of water, electricity, transportation, gasoline, all of the essential elements that make life in a quality fashion. A corollary to that is the business climate, which is now rated at the bottom or in the bottom among the 50 states right now, 50 out of 50. And that can't continue if we're going to be able to pay the liabilities. We've got to have growth in this state. So affordability and business climate and growth going forward. And I'd say the third, which could frankly kill both of the top two, would be the pension debt, the pension bomb. And I guess I would include in that the unfunded retiree health care along with it for state employees. I mean, an overly generous legislature with the accession of the governors, as well as, frankly, the ongoing onslaught of special interest money in Sacramento, has created a debt bomb. And if you don't believe me, go look at my home state of Illinois, which now is looking at junk bond ratings all over the place. The Chicago Public Schools almost didn't open this year. That's what awaits California, because our unfunded pension debt per capita is, I think, about 1.5 times Illinois. And that is a sort of Damocles hanging over our economy, and has got to be an impediment both for businesses that would want to stay or move to California, but also for residents who think naturally that the next thing that's going to happen down the pike is more tax increases and reduced crowding out. I think Merriam-Webster is going to adopt that as the new word for the California future, because crowding out, you're going to see this as a buzzword because a lot of municipalities already and counties are already dealing with this, as well as our school systems. And if we don't deal with it now, the situation gets worse much later.
Well, you've already given us a lot to talk about.
Yes, we have a lot to talk about.
But I want to follow up on a couple of your of these issues, and then we'll get to some other issues as well. You talk a lot about corruption, and that's been, I think, a theme that I've seen both in your neighborhood legislature initiative and on your website. And I wonder if you can help us understand, what it is that you're seeing, or maybe even saw in the legislature this year, that would be examples of what what you think needs to be changed in terms of that atmosphere.
Well, I mean, we can see with the housing bill that was trumpeted as a cure-all for the housing crisis, which is a crisis. I mean, people are paying 40–50% of their income in rents, as well as if they have a house, the cost of their housing. The bill that was passed basically subsidized a few people. I mean, it was hardly anything that would have an impact. And yet, of course, it also included a prevailing wage law that many experts said would increase the cost of housing $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. So at the same time the legislature is trying to do something and subsidize and encourage development, they're putting a big wet blanket on it by increasing the cost. And obviously that was bought and paid for by a special interest, some union, I suspect. That needs to end. I mean, that kind of thing, and that's just one example with housing, but I could give other examples with water and other areas. I want to talk about the word corrupt really quickly as well, Mark.
I'd be interested in that.
Because I've had some people that are offended by that, and if I've offended anybody, I really sincerely apologize. I grew up in the Chicago public school system. My mom was a Chicago school teacher, a single mom raising 4 kids. And I saw the problems with what I considered to be, and she considered to be, a corrupt system, where the principals were basically friends of the aldermen and weren't qualified for their positions. And to me, that was corrupt, because corruption isn't just an illegal act, it's also an immoral act of putting personal interests ahead of the interest that you're supposedly supposed to represent. So the aldermen in Chicago were intending to represent the people, the constituents that they represented, but they were also feathering their own bed by making sure that their cronies and their political sponsors got the best jobs. And to me, that's corruption. Now, I want to be clear too, I don't necessarily think that we send a whole bunch of corrupt people to Sacramento. I really think that maybe some of them anyway have wonderful motives and wonderful goals that they intend to get done. The trouble is it's a corrupt structure, and we're the ones that are responsible for that structure. They're almost required to be professional fundraisers. They're almost required to make sure that they raise enough money to prevent a challenge. They're also required to raise enough money so that they have enough money to beat back a negative ad from an opponent or an interest group that doesn't like a vote that they made on some issue that was important to that interest group. And of course, they always have to be afraid of some interest group going into their district and running a whole bunch of independent expenditures against them, which is why public financing is not a real solution to the campaign finance problem, because independent expenditures give groups the unalterable ability to really influence a legislator and make life difficult for that legislature if they intend to change a policy that they favor. So this system is corrupt in that sense. It's not illegally corrupt necessarily in a lot of ways, but it's morally corrupted. And if we want to have life improve in the state, which I earnestly do, and I'm sure most of our fellow voters do as well, I think we've got to tackle that structure.
And so what's your solution?
The neighborhood legislature.
Want to explain that?
You're going to get tired of hearing about it. I apologize for that in advance, but
how many people have heard about it?
We need to.
Oh, not that many.
Well, we need to get the word out more.
Okay.
We're awaiting the validation of the signatures right now. We submitted 800,000, and hopefully that will get cleared for the ballot in November 2018. I've been working on this for quite a long time. It's been academically vetted. We've had academic studies. I've given speeches on it all across the state. It essentially makes every district, as you know, California has the largest legislative districts in the world, 1 million people in a state Senate district. Think of that big state Senate district and having it chopped into 100 little tiny districts. And I got this idea from New Hampshire, which has had these little tiny legislative districts for 150 years. Those 100 people are elected in those little neighborhoods. They don't all go to Sacramento. What they do is they get together in a caucus and they select one member of a working committee to go to Sacramento. So there's still only 120 people that go to Sacramento. And they're accountable to the 99 people who stayed home and sent them there. They're able to communicate instantly with modern technology. So it's kind of a technological solution because it involves our current ability to communicate instantly. And they're able to go to Sacramento, though, and they're able to act as they should in the pursuit of best practices, which as a policy-making or a policy advising organization you should want. But they're actually able to operate free of the issues of having people who don't like what they're doing run ads against them, because everybody will only represent a tiny little district. 5,000 or 10,000 people breaks down to only a few thousand households. And in those little districts, you don't need money. So it's an answer to campaign finance reform. You don't need money to run a race. You can spend it if you want, and people in New Hampshire have tried to do that. They've spent $30,000, $40,000 to win one of the tiny little districts in New Hampshire. They lose. They lose almost every time because the voters recoil. They say, I'm going to vote for the guy who visited my house. If we look at the detachment of the voter, and we did a lot of polling on this before I got into this race, most voters, first of all, many don't register. The registration rates are around 50% of eligible voters. The turnout rates are even less than that. There was a Tuesday, there was a Los Angeles Assembly District you saw, 18,000 people turned out in what should be an important race. It's one of 80 assembly districts, right? And 18,000 people turned out. The voters' answer in our surveys is, what difference does it make? These people go to Sacramento, they say they represent me, but they do what the funders desire. They're worried about what the funders think when they go to Sacramento. They don't really, consider my vote or consider my needs. So why should I spend any time? I'm gonna watch the NFL, or I'm gonna watch E or whatever channel, or they're watching at the time, and I'm not going to pay attention to politics. The Washington Post has a slogan: "Democracy ends in darkness." I think democracy ends when people don't care, or when people think their vote doesn't matter. That's when democracy ends. And I see that writ large in California, and I really believe once we get information out and we get rid of the misinformation about the neighborhood legislature, people are going to see what the 100 Rotary clubs I've given the speech to see as well. They see it as, wow, that's a solution that could work to get rid of this corruption and get rid of the money and let us really reform some policies that desperately, desperately need to be reformed.
Well, thanks for explaining, and there might be some questions later on about that, but I want to move on to the second point you brought out, which was affordability.
Yeah.
And I want to break that down in a couple of different ways. First of all, in our polling, housing affordability is a huge issue for Californians in every region of the state, especially in the coastal regions of California. So I would like to hear what your thoughts are about how to make housing more affordable for more Californians, since apparently what the legislature did this year you felt was inadequate.
Well, yeah, it was very inadequate because, frankly, we're probably 2 or 3 million homes under where we should be. I mean, we should be building 300, 400,000 homes a year for the amount of population that we have. I mean, look at the homeless situation. Now, obviously, that's a lot of drug issues and mental health issues, but I tell you what, a lot of people are living in their cars because their rent's gone up so much and they can't afford their apartment any longer and they don't want to drive. We have this double situation where people are moving farther and farther away from their work, and then on top of that now, the legislature's raised the gas tax, and so it's making it even more difficult to afford the necessities of life. Clearly, the answer to housing is supply. It's not subsidizing a few people. It's making it so that you can actually build a home. I've talked to so many builders tell me it's 8 years to get something approved. There's a lot of NIMBY that's out there, and there's a lot of incentives that work in the opposite direction. We've got to start building high rises. We've got to get more density, I'm afraid. I mean, we've got a wonderful climate. A lot of people like to live here. We've got to make sure that we have availability of that. We can't have people sitting in, along the side of the road or in tent cities everywhere. We've got to make sure that we have housing available. So we've got to look at a lot of different alternatives to increase it. I've called for the repeal and replacement of CEQA. The California Environmental Quality Act, which was signed by a Republican. It was done by President Reagan, Governor Reagan at the time, and another guy from Illinois, by the way. Pete Wilson, by the way, was also born in Illinois, for those of you who want to know a little trivia. So 3 out of the last 4 Republican governors in the last 50 years have been born in Illinois. But the CEQA has outlived its usefulness in many ways. It's helped. I'm an environmentalist. I believe in clean air. I love the fact that I can see buildings in Los Angeles now that I couldn't see before, and all across the state. But we also need to build houses for people. I mean, it's wonderful to have air to breathe. I want the air clean, but I also want to make sure people aren't living in the streets and that they can afford to buy food, they can afford to send their kids to a school and get college. I mean, I paid for my own college and law school. I worked a couple of jobs to get my way through school. You can't do that today. And you especially can't do that if you're paying 40, 50% of your income in housing costs. And on top of that, you've got gasoline that's twice as high as the rest of the country. You've got water, electricity that are twice as high. And don't forget, those water, electricity, and gasoline costs also end up in the price of all your food and your housing and your groceries and your clothing, because the stores have to get their products some way, right? That's delivered by trucks burning more expensive gasoline and using more expensive electricity, and that's all built into the cost. And it's too much. It's too much for the people of this state, and it's made this state really unaffordable.
Thank you. So on the topic of affordability, you brought up the recent gas tax increase, and you're in favor of its repeal.
Absolutely.
And
there's a reason.
And I'd like to pose this question to you. In our polling, we see more than 60% of Californians say that traffic is a big problem in their region, right?
Yep.
More than 60% are in favor, say that it's very important that the state be spending more money to improve our transportation infrastructure. In our early polling, we haven't asked questions since the gas tax was passed. Most people said that they were against the gas tax. How would you propose to get the funding that we need so that transportation is less of a problem and that we're spending money on transportation infrastructure, which most Californians believe we need to do?
Absolutely. Believe me, I've been stuck in Los Angeles in what I call the world's largest parking lot. That's the 5 going through Los Angeles. Interestingly enough, the legislation, as I understand it, had disincentives for adding capacity, because there's a lot of environmental lobbyists that didn't like more cars on the highway and don't want capacity being added, which I think is essential. And see, that's one of the problems with this bill, and that is it raised the gas tax, certainly, and that provided more money to the state, coffers, but there was no assurance it was going to be spent on transportation projects. There was no clear creation of more capacity. There was no reform of Caltrans, which is one of the most inefficient agencies anywhere. Studies that I've seen show that Caltrans spends multiples of what other states spend to build or fix a mile of road. There was very little that was done to assure people that the money would actually be used in the most efficient way possible. I come from the private sector. I'm a businessman. I'm not a politician. I can't afford to waste money. When I do a building, when I do a rehab or anything else on my properties, I've got to make sure that I use the money wisely and efficiently. That is nowhere to be found in Sacramento, I'm here to tell you. And I think that's the problem with people. I want infrastructure done. This state collects well more than enough money to do that. We added it up, and you're talking about almost $20 billion a year is collected in motor vehicle related revenue. I'm talking sales tax on cars, sales tax on gasoline, the gas tax itself, registration fees, all of that, motor vehicle related. I think most voters who aren't part of the political process would have the presumption that the money that's related to motor vehicles would end up getting built, spent on roads. And it's not. The state has been spending about, $4.5 billion a year? And by the way, in Texas terms, getting maybe $1.5 billion worth of road construction done. So to me, that's not a good investment, and that's not a good deal. And that's why this bill has to be repealed, so that we get something that truly gets the road infrastructure done, but done in an efficient, quality, and increased capacity, as well as repair the current roads.
So you don't think we need to spend more money?
I think we do. We do need to spend, well, let's put it this way. We need to spend more money effectively. Okay. We have a $150 billion backlog of infrastructure projects. I'm well aware of that. And of course, our ability to fund those projects is going to be directly related to growth in the economy, and I hope we're going to talk about that, because we need to get growth in this economy going. Outside of Silicon Valley, we really haven't. But we need infrastructure. We need to get people to work. We also need to do some things smartly. I mean, again, a little more density would help that situation, because you then have people who can afford to, live closer to, where they work, and that would alleviate a lot of the problems too. And I certainly believe in mass transit. I certainly believe in new technologies, the Hyperloop and other things like that. I think are wonderful new technologies that are being developed, mostly right here in California. So I'm a big believer in those.
Thank you. Let's turn to the issue of growth, and I want to start with what we can do about the poverty rate in California. Some of my colleagues are here today who have put out fact sheets on children's poverty and on poverty and the poverty rate in California. And the reality is that we've had growing income inequality in California. We have a very large group of people who live in poverty and then near poverty. What are your ideas about how we create economic mobility so that there are more people in California who are able to create a decent life for themselves and their families?
Inequality is a huge issue for me, Mark, because of my background. I mean, as I said, I worked my way through school, but I mean, we were growing up the son of a school teacher raising 4 kids in Chicago. We didn't have any money. I mean, we drove Volkswagens. I drove cross country in a Volkswagen bus without air conditioning. No tears to be shed. I shed a lot of tears during that trip, let me tell you. So I grew up with nothing. The way that I've achieved what I've achieved is the ability to have my own business. I mean, it kills me when I hear politicians, and mostly they're the other party, and they talk about this horrible inequality that we have, yet they go out and encourage more regulations, more government, more restrictions on competition, more inability to start your own business. And it's especially true for our black and brown members of society, who right away start off with a disadvantage because of the discrimination that has been visited upon them. We need to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to start their own business. And I got to tell you, laws like PAGA, the Private Attorney General's Act, I've been visiting with small business people who are literally targets of trial lawyers. I mean, I'm a lawyer myself. I'm a CPA first, but we keep churning out more lawyers than rats these days, and it's law schools are a profit center for most colleges, and they got to find something to do, and we've enabled them even more. But the trouble is, they target small businesses, and you see, the big businesses also buy politicians in Sacramento. And of course, they don't care about regulation, because they just add another couple lawyers to their staff and pass on the cost to their customers. And small businesses can't do that. I mean, they really can't. My business, I now have grown to 90 employees. I've done that over a period of 40 years of working day in, day out, and I've loved every single minute of it. It's the most enriching thing to watch your own small shop grow to be successful. I want that for every Californian. And I got to tell you, the situation in Sacramento is, the more regulation, the more trial lawyers can go after you, the more things that we can throw in the path of small business, the better for them. That has got to change, and we are not going to tackle inequality by taking more taxes and handing out goodies to people who don't have them. I believe the people of this state want affordable health care, they want affordable housing, but they want the ability to buy it themselves. They don't want to depend upon the government for their largesse. They don't want to have to stand in line and get a handout from somebody. They want the ability to make it on their own. You mentioned, I'm a Jack Kemp conservative. I believe in opportunity. I believe in entrepreneurship. I believe in the American dream, the California dream that Antonio likes to talk about. But I got to tell you, the more you have regulation, the more you have these impediments to a small business, the more you're going to keep people away from that dream. And I'm absolutely committed. And that's where we're going to get growth, by the way, Mark. The growth in this country comes from small business. Big businesses cut, am I right? They're cutting employees left and right because they need to get lean. They need to satisfy their shareholders. I don't blame them for that. Small business is the engine of growth, and if we really want to have this economy grow and be able to pay these pension debts, we've got to have more small businesses.
Thank you. So you mentioned the fact that we have racial discrimination in our society. One of the places where we see definitely racial differences is in education outcomes. Starting with our K-12 system, we have a number of my colleagues are here today who study K-12 schools in California. And we have an achievement gap in California that cuts across income and race. And I'm wondering what you think the obstacles are that have made it so difficult for us to address the achievement gap that we have in our schools. And what solutions do you have for how we might create better outcomes for more students?
I would point out, Mark, it's even worse than that. I mean, if you look at the last 8 years, and again, that's the administration of the current governor, for all the posturing and for all the discussion and for all the increase in education, from 2011 to 2016, education funding grew 50%. Where did that money go? Didn't go into the classroom, and it certainly didn't go into achievement for our black and brown citizens. I mean, it went into administration, it went into pensions, I don't know where it went. The achievement gap has grown over the last, and I got to tell you, Mr. Newsom, our supposed frontrunner, has said, one party has been in power for the last 8 years, and there hasn't been achievement, and that gap has gotten wider, and they're going to have to own it, and I would agree with them. They should own it, and it can't continue. You know, one of the aspects of the neighborhood legislature, remember, is it gives people a seat at the table. You're talking about 12,000 neighborhoods that are going to be represented, which is going to be a lot of black, brown, Asian, Filipino, Slovakian, Armenian, a lot of neighborhoods are going to be represented, and then people are going to get a seat at the table, and they're going to demand, and they rightly should, a share of that educational pie. It's not that we don't spend enough money on education, it's that we, first of all, concentrate a lot of need in schools that don't get the funding they require. There's a lot of schools where parents, they're single parents, where there's not the ability to educate at home. Those require a lot of extra resources, and I saw them growing up on the south side of Chicago.
Could I mention the fact that, so the governor put in place a local control funding formula, which meant that more money was supposed to go to those neediest school districts, right?
Yes,
Is there
and that's helped.
anything beyond that that you would see that we should be doing?
Well, the ultimate goal I'd like to get to is, first of all, more charters, which Mr. Newsom is absolutely against. He was endorsed by the Teachers Association.
And why more charters?
Because we need more competition. You know, the one thing that I've seen in my entire business life, the reason that I get up every day to be a better investment professional, a better real estate, a better businessman, is competition. That drives me. Whenever I see a teacher, I say, I want to see teachers paid like rock stars and baseball players. Mm-hmm. And what that means, not $10 million a year, but based upon their quality. And that's never going to happen as long as teaching is run by a bureaucracy and it's not in the hands of the parents. Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of vouchers, and I got to tell you, I think public opinion is moving my way. Mm-hmm. I want to empower parents. I want to empower the free market, competition. And I'll tell you what, there'll be a bidding war for good teachers. And it won't just be in the wealthy neighborhoods, it'll be in the inner cities, because those parents in those inner cities will have economic power. Mm-hmm. And they won't have the same cost structure either, because it'll be less cost in the inner city. You know, you won't have to necessarily, you know, the cost of housing and other things like that are a lot less in those than in the neighborhood I live in. So there's going to be differences in cost that are actually going to work in their favor. But we've got to get more efficient with our use of resources. We've got to get more efficient with and better quality teachers. We're facing a teacher shortage. Think about that for a second. Why is that? There's a lot of good teachers out there. There's a lot of good young people that go into teaching, but I tell you, not enough. because they see teaching as a union-driven step, seniority-driven kind of arrangement that's a bureaucracy. I believe young people want to go into something where they're rewarded for their achievements and where they're rewarded based upon how well they do, and not deal with just being let go because they don't have enough seniority. I think we need to make sure that we owe it to our children to make sure that education is the most quality driven. And I'm a big fan of giving parents that power.
If we look beyond the K-12 system to the higher education system, the studies that PPIC has done have indicated that we're going to have a shortage of college-educated workers, and that's going to impact our economic growth ultimately in California. You talked about your personal experiences with college affordability,
right,
and compared them to what Californians face today. I think we're all very interested in hearing about what your plans would be to create more access and better outcomes for students who are going to college today in California.
Well, I started at a community college. I couldn't afford to go to a school where I went away. My older brother got all the money from that my mom saved for college, and I was a second born. You know. Birth order matters, by the way. I started at a community college. It was affordable, and I'm a big believer in a community college, especially for the first couple years. And there's a lot of issues swirling around us. One of these, of course, is the failure of the K through 12, which results in a lot of remedial education that's being undertaken by a lot of the schools. But a lot of the general courses could be done in community colleges. And then in terms of the upper level, my mom always used to brag about California. My mom got 2 master's degrees from Berkeley back in the 40s. And she always used to brag about how California had a free college education for all of its residents. And that dream has died. And the costs have just spiraled out of control. And I don't know if it's, I think we need to get more minds around this and determine what has led the cost rise. I think a large part of it, frankly, is the availability of easy financing. I always tell people when I was a young lawyer, if they had real easy deferred financing for legal fees, I'd be charging $10,000 an hour. But a lot of the reason for college increased costs is the availability of the cheap financing. But it's also, we're going to have professors work more. We're going to have to get economies together. My older brother started the first MBA distance learning program back in the 90s, the early 90s. We need to use other methods, internet. I do all my continuing education as a real estate broker and a lawyer and a CPA over the internet. A lot of education could be delivered over the internet. Obviously, there's a lot of vested interests who don't want to see those changes. And of course, we circle back to the neighborhood legislature, which will make it so that those vested interests can't obstruct a lot of the changes that are needed in the UC system. So I'm a huge fan of education, and you're absolutely right. It's the ticket out of the lower and middle classes. I would also, by the way, emphasize that I think there's a great need for vocational training. If we're going to build 3 million homes in the state, we're going to need plumbers, carpenters, electricians, roofers, carpet layers, a whole lot of people that need to be trained. And we need to make sure it's open to as many people as we can so that they can get a profession that really will give them a ticket to the middle class and the upper middle class.
If we think about those long-term future issues in California, water is one of them as well. Governor Brown has staked a lot of his legacy on the building of tunnels in the Delta region to solve issues of water quality and supply and environmental issues and supply issues going forward. I'm wondering what you think about the governor's plans to build the tunnels and whether you have different priorities around water and more generally how you pay for such big long-term projects.
We talked a little bit earlier about big projects. California has been known for big projects. It is the state of big dreams and big efforts. And I think that's wonderful. But I think what's happened in the last maybe 30, 40 years is the level of trust. When you're doing a big project like that, you've got to trust that it's being done for the right reasons, that it's the best and most cost-effective and efficient way to do it, and that it's not going to be inflated out of control in terms of cost, which leads me to the high-speed rail and the Delta tunnels, which if you talk to people in California, they will tell you they can't think of two projects that involve more cronyism and potentially more waste and more over budget and more delay and frankly, how should I say, just an incredible boondoggle. I mean, that's the only word I can use. The high-speed rail is a perfect example of that. It's now what the deadline was September 30th for some leg of it, and it's 7 years behind schedule. The litigation cost has been monumental. The project is way over budget, and why wasn't it built down the middle of the 5 to begin with? The 5 has all the overpasses and all the tunnels already built. I mean, you know, you don't have the environmental issues associated with that. I mean, I think there's a lot of question marks that people have about really what's the motivation, and are we doing the right things for people? And then they go back and they circle back. Oh yeah, it's the cronyism in Sacramento. It's the special interests who probably greased the track. And maybe they did and maybe they didn't. I'm not here to judge. I don't have any proof. But as long as the people believe that, they're not going to trust these projects. The Delta Tunnel, we certainly need to have water. We need an all of the above. We need desalination. We need recycling. We need stormwater retention. We need to build reservoirs. We've been tearing down reservoirs. A lot of that, again, the environmental lobbyists have a lot of sway in Sacramento. Some of that's good. Where does it go into excess? Again, I want best practices out of the legislature. I want a legislature that looks at these issues because they're the right things to do and not because it's going to provide a huge contract for some contributor. These are real challenges. Listen, we cut back in the drought. Did the drought really fed us? Was the drought man-made? There's a lot of people that believe that the lack of storage was a major factor in that, and I have to agree with some part of that. We have known California for decades to be a boom and bust. Drought, years of drought, and then all of a sudden we get a gusher like we did last year. We've got to be better prepared. We've got to be better prepared.
So as a Republican running for governor, a lot of people are going to want to know what are your areas of agreement and disagreement with President Trump? And what can you tell us about that?
Well, my opponents are going to try to paint me as another businessman like Trump. My style's completely different, I think. I'm kind of a policy wonk. I read 6, 7 newspapers a day. I study issues. I have to be honest, though, I think that the regulatory changes he's made, I think the tax change is a good one. I think there's some issues for California and other high-tax states. I think that's a problem.
Can we talk about that?
Sure, I'd love to. But
what about the state and local deduction?
I think it's a problem for high-tax states that they can rely on raising taxes and tell people that, oh, gee, you get a federal deduction. I think that's an easy out. I think we ought to look at our own situation and stick to our own knitting and try to reduce our tax liability here. I think that's a problem. I think the inequality among the states in that sense. I'd like a lot simpler tax system myself. As a CPA and an attorney, I've been in the tax system for 40 years. That's been my profession. And our tax system is an absolute disgrace.
Are you in favor of the bill that's...
yes, because it reduces marginal rates. You know, it's all talked about, and of course the media does this. They talk about it as a gift to the wealthy. The reason, I've been in the investment and the tax world for 40 years. The reason people make investments is because they get a return, an after-tax return. You have to understand that. It matters what you keep, not what you make. So when investors look at a return on a specific investment, they figure out how much risk they're going to take based upon how much after-tax profit they're going to make. The more after-tax profit, the more risk they're going to take. What we want to do is we want to encourage people to take marginal risks. That's what grows the economy. People make investments all day long, but what you want is you want the marginal increase. You want the increase over the normal threshold, because that margin is what powers growth. It powers the delta, if you will. You know, it powers the extra jobs and the extra opportunities that people can generate from that. And so cutting corporate tax rates is as all seen as this handout to the wealthy, and certainly it's going to benefit the people who pay taxes. But what we've got to do is we're doing this to make sure that we increase the incentive to invest and to take risks, because that's how we got the cell phone. That's how we get life-saving drugs. That's how we get computers and all the great necessities and advancements in life. We get those through innovation and people taking risks. And I certainly endorse the idea of reducing marginal rates.
Is there anything you would change about the current tax reform proposal?
Well, you know, there's a bunch of special interest gimmies that are thrown in there. And let me tell you, Congress is not immune from special interest by any stretch of the imagination. There's a reason the halls of Congress are called Gucci Gulch. You know, that's an old term, but it still is applicable. So there's a lot of garbage in this bill, just like there's a lot of garbage in bills that come out of Sacramento. And frankly, number one issue, as you remember, Mark, is doing something about the corruptive influence of special interest money, not just in Sacramento, but in Washington, D.C. as well.
What about the direction that the federal government's gone in terms of immigration enforcement? Where do you stand on that?
You know, this is a sad, sad thing, because I'm a Jack Kemp Republican. Jack was known for, you know, he would rather give a speech to La Raza than go get on the phone and raise money. He was a policy guy that really wanted to increase immigration of people who came to this country to be entrepreneurs and to get the opportunity this country affords. It is so disgraceful that the politicians have turned this into a hyper-partisan anger and fear issue. You know, there's two main ways that politicians raise money: make you angry or make you fearful. That's what makes people whip out their checkbook and write a check to them. But you know what? I'm a businessman. In the private sector, I don't have the luxury of making my customers angry or fearful. I actually have to solve the problems. I actually have to come to a solution. Immigration should be solved. We need a guest worker program. I think that's reasonably obvious, especially when you talk to people in the Central Valley who can't find workers. We certainly probably, I mean, a horrible idea to go door to door and round up people who were born here and ship them off who didn't even know any other foreign country. I mean, that's a problem. We have a failed system. There's no question about it. We've got to have security on the southern border. There's no question about that either. We got drugs and guns coming in from the southern border, which we don't have the problem in Canada. It's a failed government in Mexico, frankly, that can't police its people there very well. The murders in Mexico are just incredible. That's a fact of life. We got to deal with it, and we deserve to. You know, the number one element of government is to protect its people, and that's essential. But we got to solve these problems, and we're not going to do it declaring ourselves a sanctuary state and saying that we're not going to obey laws and suing, you know, Washington, D.C. at every opportunity. Again, we got to have a situation where, yeah, there's policies we're not going to agree with. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's figure out some compromising. Let's figure out some ways to make things work for both of us. And I think that's what a business person does.
Before we ask our friends in the audience for their questions, I'd like to hear from you. You're running for governor. What do you see as, in a sentence, if you could, the most important quality for somebody who's going to be governor of California?
Wow, I would have to, I guess, say empathy. You know, the fact, you know, again, it's not my fault, but it's the way it was. I was born, you know, a single mom. My real father left when I was a baby. So I grew up, you know, having to fend for myself. My mom took me to school. At her school, it was an all-black school, so I had a lot of black friends and empathized with the plight that they suffered through and the substandard conditions and education they were subject to. we got to move beyond race at some point. We've got to stop classifying people based on race. I absolutely believe in that. You know, my managers, my property, you know, we have African American, we have Latino, we have all kinds of people. I judge people on their qualities, and I think hopefully that's the situation we can get to in this state.
So a quick follow-up question to that, then I'm going to turn to the audience. Speaking of empathy, and I appreciate your answer, one of the things as a Republican governor that you'd have to be doing is to be finding common ground with the Democrats in the legislature. How do you see yourself doing that?
Talking to people on a policy level, Mark. I mean, I can't wait to have literally hundreds of discussions like this one, because I love this, because I want to try to talk to people, and certainly I want to listen to people's views, but I want to try to clear up a lot of misinformation. I mean, I'm a Republican. I'm not a big business Republican. I'm a small business guy. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a Republican. I started out, by the way, a Democrat. My mom was a liberal. She thought Ronald Reagan should be in jail. And I didn't disagree with that. Ronald Reagan is who brought me to the Republican Party. Because I believe in people. I believe in opportunity. I believe in our ability to decide our own education and decide and pick our own health care and shop for our own opportunities. I believe in a safety net. I absolutely, but I don't want it to be a hammock. I want it to be a situation where government helps the least among us, but it also gives us the opportunity to make what we can of ourselves. And so that's the message I would send to my Democratic friends and our black and brown friends. Don't give your vote to a party that just wants to keep you taking a check from the government or give you basically lousy health care, lousy schools, and lousy housing. I want you to grow and become something that you can afford your own free market and your own wonderful quality education, healthcare, and housing. And I think that's best done in the free markets. And that's the benefit of America. You know, if you want government-provided everything, move to Venezuela. And you'll see what happens when a government tries to be all things to all people and provide everything. That country doesn't have food on its shelves. It should be one of the wealthiest countries in the entire world. It's got more oil reserves, I think, than Saudi Arabia. And those people are destituted by a government that is basically pandering to people and not giving them the opportunity to think and buy for themselves. I think that's horrendous. I don't want to see California descend to be the Venezuela of America. I want this to be that shining city on a hill that President Reagan talked about, where you can make something of yourself and you don't need government. It's there if you need it, but you can make it on your own, and that's what I want to see happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple more questions for you, but I'll let our audience take it from here. We have somebody up front right here. And we want to try to have as many questions as possible so we can kind of keep it specific.
I'll stay all day. I love to talk this stuff.
If you had to choose between winning the race for governor but not getting your initiative passed or vice versa, which is more important to you?
That's a tough question. Huh?
No, actually, it's not that tough. I want to be governor. I want to turn the state around. I want to get things done. And I tell you what, if the neighborhood legislature doesn't pass this year, as the governor, I'll be proposing it the next go-around. It's the right thing to do because it means that people have a voice. It means that we have true competition. It means we get better people to run because you don't have to give up your whole life like you do now to run in a district of 1 million people. We can get people who have a lifetime of experience and have real qualities that they can bring to bear in the legislative process. We elect a bunch of professional fundraisers now, frankly, and that's not their fault. It's the system. So, yes, I want to be elected governor, and yes, I want the neighborhood legislature. I don't want to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. I want to get something done and improve the state.
Thank you. Yes? I'm glad you asked that question because that was
one of your questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
I also came from Chicago. It's the same reason, University of Chicago. I just couldn't take the corruption. So that was the biggest reason, and still not improved. It is getting worse.
It is.
So now we have come here. looks like we are transferring and joining the same group like that. So your ideas are great. The biggest question I have, how are you going to convince all the Californians and be on your side? I think that's a tough job you have. I like to see how you're going to convince them and get you become a governor.
Well, I have to tell you, thank you, by the way, and I'll tell you a real quick story here in a second, but I start off with 80% of people believing what I believe, and that is that the corrupt special interest controls Sacramento. That's a pretty good headwind. Now, I happen to have a tailwind. I happen to have a few headwinds, I understand, because of some of the issues with the media and some of the issues with what's going on in Washington that are going to be a headwind, and I think that can be overcome. Because I think people want the same things that I want. I want all the improvements I've been talking about, and I want to break the logjam. But I wanted to, you remember a company called Jay's Potato Chips in Chicago? I represented the family for a lot of years, and I sold the company to Borden for $30 million in 1986. I then bought it back from Borden personally for $10 million 7 years later. Which, by the way, explains why Elsie the cow doesn't exist any longer. Borden ran into the ground. But the reason I mention that is because when I bought it back, I knew everything there was to know about the company, but I knew nothing about how to make potato chips. I knew nothing about how to distribute them. I knew nothing about how to market them. I brought together a team to do each of those things, and we converted a company that was losing $17 million a year to a $3 million profit in 1 year. Didn't do it at all by myself. As a matter of fact, I exited the next year. I sold my shares to the management team and went on and went in the real estate world. I was getting too fat buying the potato chips. But the point is, that's what's going to be required in California. I mean, I'm not going to do this by myself. I saw Mr. Newsom's tape, and he's got a plan and a structure for everything. I mean, it sounded like the Soviet Union for a second, but I'm going to try to get a team of people who believe in solutions, who believe that there's a chance that the free market can have a part of that, and that we can forge these things, and we get together and we build a bridge. Basically, we are dealing with a failing state. We don't know it yet. Silicon Valley, fortunately, has covered up a lot of the failing that's going on in California right now. But we've got some tremendous problems, and we've got to build a bridge between a failing state and the ultimate successful golden state that we ought to have. And that's what I'm committed to doing, and that's why I decided to relate that story about Jay's.
Who has another question on this side of the room, maybe, or on this side of the room? We haven't heard from either side of the room? No. Okay. From the middle again.
In the Great Recession, we had California unemployment go up to 12%.
Yeah.
Many of those additional unemployed wanted to get job training from our community colleges, but because the legislature and the governor cut the budget dramatically, they weren't able to get that training. As governor, how would you work with the legislature to assure that during the next recession, anyone who's unemployed can go to a community college and get the job training they need so that when the economy recovers, they get a better paying job?
Well, and that's related as well to the issue of automation, because I've heard all kinds of people say that, including Mr. Newsom, that, oh my God, automation, the ATM is the worst thing that ever happened, right? Because we now lost all those jobs. Well, we train ourselves to get to be better, and I agree with you. We need to have more availability of educational alternatives. We obviously don't have to do them all in community college. We can do a lot of it with distance learning. We can do a lot of it with other means of providing education, and I'd certainly, avail myself of that. I'm glad you brought up the idea of another recession, because I got to tell you, we've had now a 9-year expansion or so. A recession's going to hit California, and we aren't very well prepared for it. We get 40% of our revenues from what, 1% of the people? I mean, we get a recession in this state, and we get a drop in Silicon Valley, and we're toast. I mean, we got major issues here, and the rainy day fund isn't necessarily going to be much of a rainy day fund, because this budget is so humongous that it's not necessarily going to mean much. We got to be prepared for that. We got to get growth going real soon and cut the fat and the waste in government.
So let me follow up on a budget-related question.
Yeah.
Because a few times today you brought up the issue of pensions and pension costs and,
Yeah.
and what that, how you see that impacting state spending and services. You're not the first one to note that our pension costs
No.
are an issue that needs attention, but I'd like to understand what your solutions are.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm a CPA and a lawyer who's actually drafted defined benefit pension plans. I will tell you this, the whole rest of the world, the business world has gotten rid of defined benefit pension plans. And the reason is because I refuse to die. I don't know about you, but I refuse to die. And our life expectancy is longer. And so promising people a lifetime benefit is a wonderful, wonderful thing, but you can't afford it. You also can't afford it if we do things like we did in 1999 when Mr. Villagrosa was the Speaker of the Assembly and increased the accrual from 2% to 3% for state employees. If you're having a slow, kind of a slow energy day and you want to get your blood pressure raised, go to a website called transparentcalifornia.com and you'll see dentists in the prison system making $800,000 a year total comp. Yeah, $800,000 dentists we have in the prison system. $500,000 a year psychiatrists, dozens of them. I mean, one after another. The wage and pension system for state employees is just gold-plated. It's just wonderful, but, and I applaud them for getting it, but the trouble is that cost is in the cost of your house. It's in the cost of your gasoline. It's in the cost of your clothing and restaurant bill. It's in the cost of your water and electricity. Costs are paid by consumers. They're not paid by government. They're not paid by corporations. All costs, ultimately, economically, are paid by individuals. And when you promise people these pensions, and I've run into so many police officers who are retired at age 53. And I'm 62. I'm still running my businesses and running for governor. And I've got a lot of energy and drive. How do you get retired at 53 years old? And well, the answer I get is, well, I had a pension and I wasn't earning any more credits on it. I might as well retire. That's just not going to be sustainable. But I got to tell you, try to go to be a legislator and go to Sacramento and try to make those changes. You'll get slaughtered by the special interests. I circle back to the neighborhood legislature. You've got to be able to get these situations resolved, and I'll have to work with people to do it. We're going to have to get more of a contribution. Remember this, by the way, too. I am not at all anti-union. I'm not anti-worker. I'm pro-worker. And it's the workers are the ones that get screwed in the end. If you don't believe me, go look at Detroit. Go look at Rhode Island. They all took haircuts when those pension debts, those pension liabilities came due and they couldn't be paid. The workers are the ones that got shafted, and I don't want to see that happen in California. I want to see this state make it through that.
My final two-point question for you. Why are you running for governor? And if you're successful, what kind of governor are you going to be?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to start measuring the drapes for the Oval Office like one candidate in this race. I'm running for governor because we need a transformation. I'm not running, I enjoyed his tape because he said, hey, if you want small things, it's not me. Well, you know what? I want real big things done. I want real reforms done. I want this state to become sustainable economically and living-wise, and it's not going to happen with this current system. It's got to be changed. And it's certainly not going to be happening with the one-party crony rule that we've got in this state. We've got to decide, all of us, if we're going to stay here. There's a lot of people that are moving out. And I want this state to be one that sustains itself and grows and is a great place to live. I've got a 12-year-old daughter, Mark. I get mistaken for the grandfather all the time. I want her to be able to live near me here. I don't want to ever move. By the way, I came from Chicago, but my whole family's California. My mom retired in Fresno, and my two aunts live here. I'm the last member of my family to actually make the trek out west. So I love this state. I have 3 homes here. I just absolutely am committed to this state. I can just hear my PR guy having a hard time. I want people to know that I made an investment here. I love it.
Thank you.
Listen, I've been successful. I've been lucky. I'm not going to apologize for it. But I am running for governor to transform this state, truly. I'm not doing it to move up. I'm doing it to get this accomplished.
Thank you. I really appreciate your being here today, and I think we all do. So thank you
very
very much. And I want to thank, once again, our sponsors who made it possible for us to have these free events this year in 2017. We have many more events planned for 2018. Hope that you will all join us. And I want to thank all of you for being here with us today. And I want to invite you to continue the conversation with Mr. Cox and each other and our staff who is here today. We're going to have a reception and coffee and dessert for everyone. And last but not least, I hope you all have a wonderful holiday and all the best for 2018. Thank you so much.
Wonderful holiday to everybody.
Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Marshall. Appreciate it.
Thank you.